Hello, everybody. Welcome to Football Diehards. Today, we're going to go through and talk about our favorite plays for Week 2 of the NFL. Before we get into that, I want to kick it over to Jamie. Jamie, how did you do? How was your Week 1? How was your start to the season?
Well, I had a little bit too much I had a lot too much Raheem Mostert in cash. Him and James Robinson was not able to overcome some of the hits that I had. I was able to get Kyler Murray as my quarterback and DeAndre Hopkins as part of a stack, but the running backs that I had were just not enough to overcome. I was actually saved a lot of my cash losses by GPPs. I stacked Chiefs and Browns all over the place, so was able to recoup a lot of the cash loss from that. But all in all, it was a net loss. What about you?
Yeah, there you go. I mean, I wish I would have had more of that Chiefs game. I was looking good in tournaments up until that Chiefs game. I definitely didn't have as much as I thought I would have had earlier in the week. I was actually the other way around. My cash saved me. I couldn't have done it better. I had Jalen Hurts at quarterback. I had Mixon, McCaffrey, and Kamara. Had T Higgins mixed in there as well. Bengals defense that shocked me and did really good there. So I was kind of the other way around. Cash saved me. I was looking good in tournaments up until the Chiefs completely went off and, as we expected, right? So, yeah, I thought it was a pretty solid Week 1 overall. Looking forward to getting into Week 2 here. Lots of plays that do stick out, and I cannot wait to get into it. I say we start and go position by position. We'll touch on ownership today, but Sunday, I really want to touch on ownership, and we'll talk more strategy on Sunday. But right now, kind of go through the plays that do stick out on a Wednesday. So, let's start at quarterback, Jamie, and you take a look at it up top. We have guys like Kyler Murray is going to be the most expensive, Russell Wilson, Josh Allen, Tom Brady, Dak Prescott up in that top range. Who's really sticking out to you in this top range?
Well, yeah, in the top range, I mean, I'm looking more into the mid range. I'll tell you that right now. But yeah, Kyler Murray looks really solid again. 8,200 is a little bit tough to swallow for me. So I'm kind of looking in that mid range a little bit more. I think if I was to spend, in GPPs, if I'm going to spend a little bit more on that high range quarterback, I think I'm looking more at Russell Wilson. We saw how exposed the Tennessee back end was against Kyler Murray, and Wilson is a similar style play quarterback. He's got two high-end wide receivers to throw to. So at 7,500, I feel like he has a similar ceiling to Kyler Murray, and you're saving a bit of money there. So where do you stand in that high end?
Yeah, I'm kind of the same with you. Like at quarterback last week, it was between Hurts and it was between Murray for me. If I was to go up top, I'd probably lean with Murray. I mean, you can never go wrong with him. I do like the matchup against Minnesota. Cincinnati looked really good against Minnesota last week. Murray just has that rushing yard upside. He only had 5 carries, though, last week, but he did have 20 yards and a touchdown. I like Murray. I like a stacking option. So if I was to go up and get a quarterback, it probably would be Murray for me. But you take a look at this range of quarterback, and I'm really curious to hear your thoughts on some of these guys because these guys really stick out to me. These three in a row: Tom Brady, Dak Prescott, and Justin Herbert. I'm really curious. Out of those three, which one are you looking at the most for this week?
Oh my gosh, I know. I'm already. It's Wednesday, and I'm already having hives over this decision. I will tell you right now, it will be one of those three guys, because you're hitting it right on the head there. I think right off the bat, we got a lot of time. The Dallas Chargers game is going to be heavily, heavily owned, and when we get to wide receiver, I'll talk about Keenan Allen. So my lean of those three right now is with Justin Herbert, who is he was $100 cheaper than Dak and 200 cheaper than Tom Brady. He's my initial choice there. Dallas's defense, again, we knew coming in how poor their secondary was. Just today, they lost DeMarcus Lawrence, their top pass rusher, so their defense is going to be even more exposed. So that Chargers offense should be firing this weekend, and just to be able to pair Justin Herbert with Keenan Allen in cash is, I think, a very smart play. But if you're going to tell me that you like Dak or Brady better than him, you're not going to get any argument from me.
Yeah, 100%. That Dallas game is going to be a game that I probably talk about a ton all week. It's the highest implied total as of now, 55 points. It's a game that I want to target on both sides, right? Like the Dak side, you can pair him with guys that I think are way too cheap. Cooper, Lamb, and somebody else we'll talk about, and Wilson. That's 3,100. I think that makes Dak
Hmm.
stacks very intriguing. Passed the ball 58 times last week. Even last year when he was healthy, I believe he passed the ball like on average 50.5 times per game. So the volume's definitely there for Dak. That's kind of where I'm gravitating towards too. But Justin Herbert, same thing. They didn't have the best game last week. Guys like Austin Eckler, which was really weird. He had 0 receptions. But I'm really interested in guys like Eckler this week in this game. Guys like Keenan Allen. Keenan Allen is probably one of my favorite, if not my favorite, wide receiver on the play. But sticking up in this range, I want to get your thoughts on this ownership. So Josh Allen right now, it's Wednesday, so this is definitely going to change, right? But Wednesday, Josh Allen is coming in as the highest owned quarterback at 14%. After that, Kyler Murray, okay? And then after that, Justin Herbert, 11%, Russell Wilson, 9%, Tom Brady, 9%, Prescott, 7%. So that's very interesting. Out of the guys we touched on so far, Dak Prescott's actually coming in the lowest owned out of them.
Oh, that is GPP gold. Then, if that holds, I, I can't imagine it's going to. The Josh Allen ownership, I can't say that I get right now. He's such an efficient quarterback, and he adds that rushing upside to it. But he's again got a decently difficult matchup, at least comparatively to the guys that we've discussed. Tom Brady against Atlanta, and Herbert and Dak facing each other's defenses. Excuse me, far softer matchups than Josh Allen facing those corners and that pass rush from Miami. So yeah, in GPP, I'll love to see that ownership hold because I'll be overweight on them in GPPs as well as cash there too.
Yeah, definitely. We'll touch on it Sunday for sure. And if it's that way, I'm going to be very, very heavy on Dak Prescott. We mentioned Tom Brady a little bit. I guess my only concerns with him is, he did throw the ball, I think, like 50 times. It was against Dallas. Obviously, a really good matchup. Here against Atlanta, still a very good matchup, but they are 12-point favorites. I guess my concern is if they get out ahead early, they start running the ball a ton. But even then, like the pass catching options for Tampa Bay are just way too cheap. I think Mike Evans is like 6,100. Antonio Brown is 6,000. So Tom Brady's definitely somebody else I'm looking at there. Going down a little bit further, for me, like we talked about the 3 guys in that range, right? For me, that's kind of where I'm sticking if I was to go up get Murray, but I'm really, sold on, guys like Herbert, Brady, and Prescott. Going down the list, is there anybody in like this lower range that sticks out to you this week?
Not for cash. I think in cash, I'm pretty well set in that range, unless something drastically changes here. But Teddy Bridgewater showed a lot. Unfortunately, it was against my team, the Giants, but he showed innovation in the pocket. The offensive line was pretty well protective of him, and on paper, he's got a much softer matchup against Jacksonville's back end this week. Um, it hurts to not have Jerry Jeudy for sure. But they do have KJ Hamler and Tim Patrick and Noah Fant, their tight end, who's one of my favorite tight end values this week. So for 5,400, I kind of like him stacked with Sutton and Fant in GPPs because you can get some high end running backs or wide receivers to pair with that. And there's a lot of Jacksonville bringbacks in that stack as well. I think it's going to go a little bit under the radar.
Yeah, Bridgewater definitely looked good. For me, somebody that as of now is coming in sub 2% ownership is Joe Burrow kind of sticks out to me here. It is just because of the price point. So what I typically like about Burrow and the Bengals offense is they typically throw the ball a ton. Last week, though, we only saw Burrow throw the ball 27 times. I think that had a lot to do with them being up in the game, them running the ball a ton. I think Mixon had like about 30 touches in that game. So I do think the upside's there for Burrow. And then you take a look at the price points, right? Like Joe Burrow is 5,800. You have a T. Higgins, who is still way too cheap this week. Jamar Chase, who is still way too cheap this week. So I think an interesting, really low-owned stack is going to be this Bengals offense. I think I'm going right back there. The Bears matchup definitely does not scare me. So if I was to look down, it probably would be Joe Burrow at extremely low ownership as of now.
Yeah, I like that. I agree with that. And we know that the Bears secondary is in a shambles right now, and the Rams exploited it. So yeah, I'm fine with that. And the Bengals were showing were showing pace again. That they were going to be on pace with what they were doing last year. And you're right. We talked about last week how egregiously priced some of their skill players were, and they haven't really corrected enough where they would. So I agree with you on that one as well.
Yeah. Anything else stick out to you in quarterback?
No, I think one question, if I can go back to the Josh Allen thing. So a big reason, if you kind of read around that he posted such a big dud, and that the Bills offense did is that the Steelers kind of threw him a curveball. That they're known for those heavy blitz packages, and they they pretty much de-emphasized that, and they just dropped extras back into coverage. Do you think that was just the Bills offense getting out coached for 1 week and not being prepared for that defensive scheme? Or do you think that's a possible defensive scheme that could maybe exploit some of Josh Allen's weaknesses a little bit more, and we see more of those things?
I think it could be a little bit of both. Honestly, I'm not too worried about Josh Allen going forward. It was a pretty bad game. He still had 51 passing attempts, though, completed 30 of those. I don't have too much concern going forward. The only concern I have, to be honest, is going to be that Josh Allen right now is projected to be the highest owned quarterback. That's something I don't like. Yeah, I think Josh Allen's fine. I think he's definitely in play. Tough matchup last week against the Steelers. Another pretty tough matchup, but I don't really worry about that too much. But I guess the only thing that concerns me is that ownership. He is the highest projected owner, owned by about 4%.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm curious if there's panic going around with the industry over Josh Allen at all. I'm with you. I'm not super concerned, but you're right. I mean, that ownership, I'm still going to be living in that range, slightly under him, I think, if the ownership holds.
110%. So I say we move on to the running backs. So it was weird. Last week, I was kind of, making an emphasis on paying up and getting Kamara and McCaffrey, and I still will do some of that this week, but we'll touch on it. There are so many running backs this week in this bottom range, this mid range, that I think is going to provide a ton of value. And on the flip side, I think there's a ton of wide receivers that I like up in the mid to upper range. So I think it's going to be kind of the opposite of last week for me. Last week, I paid up a running back. I paid down at wide receiver. It worked, here and there. Callaway did not do well. Marvin Jones Jr. did very well. But this week, I'm kind of looking forward to, maybe going up and getting one of these guys, but going more in this mid-range for running back. And then at wide receiver, I'm in love with the mid-range and the upper range there. So just your thoughts right away off of, how you're going to be attacking the slate this week compared to last week, if anything changed at all.
As of right now, just kind of going through and building preliminary lineups, I'm pretty much with you. I would like, Kamara does stick out to me on the high end as somebody that I would like to have if I can, but I had him last week as a core play, and that I was going to spend whatever I could there. And I had McCaffrey in alongside him until the sermon news dropped, and then I started doing some fancy finagling and basically switched out McCaffrey and whatever cheap receiver it was, I don't even remember, for Mostert and Devontae Adams, which destroyed me. I'm kind of with you on this too. The mid-range running backs and mid-range wide receivers. In my preliminary cash game lineup right now, my highest priced skill position player is Keenan Allen at 7,000. So I'm happy in that mid-range running back, and I got a couple that are sticking out to me now. I'm curious if you do too.
Yeah, we'll definitely get there. But first, I want to touch on the top range here. So we have Christian McCaffrey, and it was so weird. It seemed like Christian McCaffrey had an off day, right? And then you take a look at how he did. He scored 27.7 DraftKings points, which is I believe the second most on the slate, behind Joe Mixon, who scored 28. So it's so weird. It seemed like that was Christian McCaffrey's floor, and he could have had a much better game. And I expect going forward, he's going to have a much better game. It's a tough matchup here against the Saints, but as we all know, Christian McCaffrey's matchup proof. He had 9 receptions last week, and just curious. You have McCaffrey, Cook, Kamara, and Henry up here. This is the top 4 up in this range. If you're looking at one of these guys, who are you looking at?
It's Kamara again for me, and again, it's more so that he is the cheaper of them. McCaffrey seems to have the higher receiving floor at the moment now, which is tough to say about someone like Kamara, who we always bank on to be that PPR running back. But Carolina, even though they're strong up front against the run, they allowed the third most receptions out of the backfield last season. So with the discount, if I am paying up, he is the one that sticks out to me right off the bat. That being said, I certainly, if there's extra money you have for an extra 300 for Cook, and you think he's the better play, I don't argue. And then I'm never going to argue playing Christian McCaffrey on a PPR site at under 10,000.
Yep, agree with you there. For me, if I had to rank them, it'd probably be McCaffrey and then Kamara. I don't really see myself getting much Cook or Henry this week, to be honest. But there is a guy, I'm curious to get your thoughts on this guy, and he's probably my favorite running back on the slate this week. And I'm not really typically a big Nick Chubb guy. I don't like the fact that he's not going to go out there and catch multiple passes like a McCaffrey, but I think this is a phenomenal matchup for him. I think this is a phenomenal game script, a game where the Browns are actually the biggest favorites as of now on the slate. 12.5-point favorites the Browns are. They are at home as well. I think the Browns are just going to run the ball, run it a ton, and Nick Chubb is an absolute beast. He had 23.1 DraftKings points last week. I believe he had either 15 or 16 carries, mixed in a couple receptions as well, and I think he has a high floor in this game against a Houston team that is not that great defensively. So Nick Chubb, 7,800, is a guy that I'm really looking forward to playing. You get a $2,100 savings off of Christian McCaffrey, a $1,000 savings off of Alvin Kamara as well. Curious to hear your thoughts. Are you as high on Nick Chubb as I am this week?
Yes. I'm not going to go out and call him a lock right now, just because there's so many mid-range running backs, even cheaper than that I like a lot too. So I gotta kind of see how the lineups build themselves. But I mean, you hit on the head. He has overall RB1 upside this week, even though it still does remain a timeshare backfield. I don't know if we can point to that just based on last week, because that was a pretty neutral game script fight they had there with them. Chubb out touched Hunt, but they were pretty even in snaps. But yeah, in this one, I think I haven't seen the latest ones, but they were 13-point favorites last I saw. The Texans gave up the most fantasy points per game to running backs last season. I can't imagine. I can't imagine he has a bad game in this thing, and I think Hunt is fine in GPPs as well. Too, but yeah, if Chubb is like the ultimate cash game floor play here, and he's got to be considered one of the top running backs on the slate. And if you said he was the top running back, I'd kind of maybe argue his pass catching against the guys we mentioned before, but I certainly wouldn't say it was a stupid call.
Yep, couldn't agree more there. So going down a little bit to this mid-range, this is where I'm going to get a lot of my action this week. And I'm going to throw out four guys, just like I did at quarterback, and they're all back-to-back-to-back. I'm curious to hear your thoughts. If you had to pick one guy out of this bunch, who would it be? So 6,300, Najee Harris, 6,200, Zeke Elliott, 6,100, David Montgomery, and Chris Carson. If you had to pick one, who would you go with?
Najee Harris is my favorite per dollar running back right now on the slate. He played 100% of the snaps last week. I'm always very wary of rookie running backs just because that jump to the NFL is something that people take for granted, that you have to do a lot more than you're in college, and you have to play differently, and you have to be able to pass protect and things along those lines. But I mean, just given the fact that he played every snap in the first game against Buffalo, a much tougher matchup than they have against the Raiders this week. 6,300 is, to me, an egregious price for him. It's incorrect. The Raiders have allowed the 11th most fantasy points per game to running backs last year. I was hoping a little bit more for the passing game upside to show itself with Najee Harris, but I think if we did see that, he'd be higher priced. He did get 3 targets. He caught one of them. A very pedestrian game against the tough matchup against the Bills, 2.8 yards per carry. That's not numbers that you like, but the strong workload is what I'm looking for here. And the Raiders front is nothing like the Bills front. So he's my guy of the 4. What about you? Where are you on those four? Because I like them all.
Yeah, I like them all as well. And yeah, what was interesting is I'm looking at ownership now, and I thought, Harris, he had a bad game. He scored 5.9 DraftKings points. I'm taking a look at the ownership, and right now, Harris is actually the highest owned running back. So people are kind of seeing through it like we are. He's projected 20.29%, making him the highest owned running back, higher owned than Chubb, Eckler, Kamara, McCaffrey. So yeah, interesting. And I get it. He's way too cheap. I think the upside's there. You mentioned 100% of the snaps. Like, that's crazy, right? A guy I do want to throw out there in the same range that we talked about a little bit, Zeke Elliott. Like, this price point has me very intrigued. The game has me intrigued. It is a 55-point game total. Zeke Elliott probably burned a lot of people on the Thursday game there. He scored 5.9 DraftKings points. It just seems like, especially in a game like this, it seems like Zeke is way too cheap. And then I'm taking a look at Zeke's ownership, and he's only coming in at 5% owned. Just want to get your overall thoughts on Zeke. I mean, do you think he's done? Do you think he's washed, or do you think it was just they went against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who has one of, if not the best run defense in the NFL? And do you think they'll get back on track? And do you think Zeke will get back on track here against a much less tougher matchup against the Chargers?
Yeah, that's the ultimate. The guys Tampa Bay have up front. I mean, they stop everybody. That's not, there are question marks about Zeke, and some of them could potentially be valid, but you can't judge a guy on how he ran against the Tampa Bay front. You just can't. They don't allow 100-yard rushes. They allowed under 3 yards a carry last year. I think Zeke is not a cash play, but he is the ultimate GPP play for the reason you spoke of, because he's got a much tougher matchup. His ownership is low, and the passing game in that is going to be so highly owned that if he sneaks those touchdowns in, if he gets the scores at the goal line and it's not a shootout where they're passing back and forth, you're getting such leverage on the field with this, and you're getting basically a bargain price for a guy who is a first-round pick this year. So, yeah, he's definitely a top GPP target for me.
Yeah, these are spots I love in DFS when, these guys screw people over the week before and then people are all off on them. That's when I like to jump on them. And then I really love ownership as well. Like I mentioned, Zeke Elliott right now coming in at 5% ownership. Going down a little bit, David Montgomery, 6,100. I think he's a pretty solid play as well. He's coming in at 4.4% ownership. Any thoughts on Montgomery?
Oh, yeah, for sure. The targets, he only had one target, which is a little bit frustrating. Damian Williams seemed to get the passing volume in that game, but yeah, Cincinnati's a solid matchup to run against. Tariq Cohen to me is a much bigger threat to Montgomery's passing volume, and he's not there. The only thing that might might get me off him is if we see a fancy quarterback change at some point in this week. I haven't heard any kind of hints that we will. And I've been predicting all offseason that Dalton would start, get beat up by the Rams, and then Fields would come in and be the hero with the soft matchup at home against Cincinnati. So it doesn't look like it's going to happen that way. But if it does, that might get me off Montgomery a little more, just because I don't know how they'll run goal line packages with a rushing quarterback. And, they even brought Fields in to run one in this past game. So that's an annoyance for Montgomery, but very solid floor against Cincinnati.
Yep, understandable there. And then, yeah, for me, I mean, that's probably the range I'm going to be living in this week. I really like Harris. I really like Elliott. I like Montgomery. I like Chris Carson. I like that range. I like those four right there. Going down in terms of, going under this 6K range, I mean, not much sticks out to me, really. Anything stick out to you under 6K?
Yeah, I really like Damian Harris. He dominated the Patriots backfield. They rushed the ball 30 times and he had 23 of them. 4.3 yards per carry is not elite, but certainly fine. If he's going to get that kind of workload, he's got a great matchup against the Jets that can be exploited at $5,400, which is a little bit too cheap. They ranked 19th in rush defense DVOA last season. So the only hang up for me right now with Damian Harris is, we talk about how we like to find the punt defenses right now, and the Jets, the Jets are kind of the one I'm looking at right now. So it's a little annoying to play the Patriots running back and then play the defense there. But yeah, I like Harris a lot at 5,400 in that range.
Yeah, I have Harris in season long. I was very happy with how he looked. He looked great. The only problem is that fumble. You can't really trust what
Yeah,
the coaches say all that much, but they said that they're going to limit Harris's workload, which would be dumb. I don't see why they would do that. He looked great. I don't think you should limit his workload off of a mistake.
I know, but I know that, but we've also see, Jonas Gray play for the same coach, never to be heard from again because he overslept. Is that what it was? He overslept or something like that after scoring his 4 touchdowns, and then we never heard from him again. So you never know how that coach is gonna react. So I can understand if that is a concern for cash games. I definitely will be playing him in GPP, and his ownership is one to watch coming into this. But I mean, he rushed for 100 yards, so. I'm
Yeah,
good with him.
I thought he looked great.
Yeah,
Another guy I want to touch on. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this. First of all, the San Francisco backfield. I know, me and you got kind of screwed a little bit with the Mostert situation, getting hurt and all that. But I'm curious to hear your thoughts on the 49ers backfield now, and then Eli Mitchell, who is 5,000.
it's such a polarizing thing right now. So first of all, before I answer that, you're in season long leagues, I'm sure. What's he going for in that one in all your waiver wires? And did you get him in any of them?
I tried to get him. I think I put like $8 on it, and then somebody outbid me. I think got like 15 on it. So we went for 15 in my league.
Oh wow! I mean, are you in the Scott Fishbowl in my division? In that he went for 75 out of the out of the $100 budget. The guy who did has had Akers and Dobbins, so I can understand being a little bit more aggressive on that. But yeah, if you're on Twitter, I mean, if you've been following along Twitter, he's been going for some pretty pretty fantastic dollar amounts there. Um, as far as DFS, I can't. I don't think I can play him in cash. I mean, we've seen this before with Kyle Shanahan. He very rarely commits to a bell cow back. And Mitchell himself was not a bell cow in college. He was a committee back. The 49ers traded up for Trey Sermon in this draft. So I'm a little uneasy about the fact that everyone's saying, well, they drafted Mitchell in this thing, they must really like him. I think you really have to monitor Trey Sermon this week and JaMychal Hasty as well. If Mitchell's ownership is too high, then I'm going to stay away from him in GPP as well and probably take some shots on those other 49er running backs. But it's a touchy situation for me.
Yeah, very touchy for sure. I mean, we really just don't know. Like, I thought Sermon would be the guy behind Mostert, but maybe it's Mitchell. So we'll definitely see. The reason I only put $8 on it because I do have so many question marks about this 49ers offense, right? Like, we really don't know. Like, I mean, one week it could be Mitchell, the next week it could be Sermon, maybe it's Hasty one week. So I didn't want to go too crazy on it. Definitely not $75 crazy on it there. But anything else sticking out to running back?
I think we touched on it. Daryl Henderson Jr. is interesting to me this week in GPPs, just simply because his price hasn't moved, and he took up a huge chunk of the rushing share. I don't have the numbers on him, but it was most of the snaps he took. I think Sony Michel only had 1 carry. Problem is Indianapolis is a total pass funnel offense. They stuff the run. So there's a lot of downside to him. But someone with that workload with such a cheap price, I guess, is somewhat intriguing to me in GPPs there too, especially since I think the Rams passing game, kind of like we talked about with Elliott and the Cowboys, the Rams passing game will be high owned. So Henderson is kind of interesting leverage there.
Yeah, I thought he'd be, a lot lower owned than he's showing right now. Right now, it's saying Henderson projected to be about 13% ownership, which makes him the 6th highest owned on the slate, which is really interesting to me.
All right, then, yeah, that's something to monitor too. So, at that
Mhm.
ownership, I'm not really, I'm not really as interested in GPP because the Colts third fewest points per game to running backs last year and are setting up to be a similar defense this year.
Yeah, I'm with you there. All right, so let's move on to the wide receiver position. Lots to talk about here. I guess we'll kick it up top first. So we have Hopkins, Diggs, Metcalf, Ridley, Jefferson, and Lockett up in this top 7K range, 8K. Who's sticking out to you the most in this top range here?
Well, this is similar to quarterback, where I'd like to live a little bit cheaper in that mid range. But if we are looking at the top end, where did I lost my page there for a second? I'm looking a lot more at Hopkins again, just because I think he's got the highest ceiling. Minnesota is strong up front, so this is when I think we're going to see Arizona open up a lot more. He didn't get priced up too much. He was 7,800 last week, is 8,000 this week, which is about right for him. But at that ceiling and the catch rate, we said he was due positive TD regression. He scored twice in week one. I think we're going to see him get a lot more consistent positive TD regression, and his catch rate with Arizona is a career high with Kyler Murray. So he is, if you have the money to pay up for a receiver, he is super safe to do so, and the matchup with Minnesota isn't that bad for him.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you in the fact that I'm probably going to be living in this mid-range for wide receivers. So many guys stick out. Up top, though, it's probably going to be more of an ownership thing for me. We have Hopkins right now, the number one owned at 19%. Stephon Diggs, 18%. Who else is up there? Metcalf is 11%. And then Calvin Ridley is 9%. I guess my favorite one would probably be Calvin Ridley. And man, did the Falcons look horrible. I mean, they could have not looked worse last week. Matt Ryan looked awful. Pitts, did not perform well. 8 targets, only 4 receptions. Ridley, only 10 points. He looked good to start off the game. I think in the very first drive they had, he had a couple catches, had a decent amount of yardage. But I think could be a very good, buy low spot on Calvin Ridley. I think all the talent's there. I think the matchup's there against Tampa Bay. And I think I might go to him here, especially looking at the ownership, seeing him sub at 10%. I might go back to Calvin Ridley this week just due to ownership reasons. I think a lot of people are going to be off of, not just Ridley, but the Falcons' offense in general, because they could not have not looked worse last week. It was horrible to watch.
Yeah, I like that call, and I think you're right. I think that's another thing where owners are going to feel burned, especially since they had good reason to feel that way because of how awful the team offense and defense looked. But we've spoke about Ridley and how he was the leader in air yards last season, and without Julio Jones, every stat rises significantly. So, yeah, I'm with you on that one. And the Tampa Bay secondary did not look like anything that can't be exploited in that week one against Dallas. Of course, the quarterback difference there could be significant, but yeah, Ridley at that ownership, that's screaming GPP upside. I agree.
Yep, for sure. So this is the ownership that I'm most looking forward to. It sounds like you are as well. The 6,000 to 7K range. I'm looking at it right now, and there are so many guys that stick out. So from 6,000 to 7K, who is your favorite player?
Well, we touched on the Dallas Chargers game with the quarterbacks, and I think you got to get aggressively into this range because they're all underpriced on both sides of the ball in this. So I think you have to aggressively target this game from a receiving standpoint. Keenan Allen is a core play to me at 7,000, especially if Herbert winds up being the quarterback. And you have to have one of the 2 Dallas receivers in Amari Cooper and CeeDee Lamb and Cash, I think. I think that's how you got to start your builds this week with those guys because they are just way, way too cheap for their talent level, the game environment, the defense that they're facing. I'm not picky which one of Cooper or Lamb you choose. I think they both have top 5 overall upside receiver this week. If you're telling me I need to pick one, I like Cooper a little bit better, but he's also $400 more expensive. So if you need that 400, Lamb is perfectly fine. So I think you have to start with at least 2 of the 3 of those guys there. Where do you stand on that as far as cash and in GPP?
Yeah, so Keenan Allen, I'm glad you like him as well because he's actually probably my favorite wide receiver play on the entire slate. Keenan Allen, somebody that is always very reliable to get a ton of targets, to get a ton of receptions, very safe, always has that floor. And now you put him against the Dallas Cowboys in a 55-point game total. I think he is, crazily underpriced at 7K. And I'm taking a look at his ownership right now. And although he is, I think, like the eighth or ninth highest owned, I still think he's a little bit too low owned, coming in around 10%. So I really like Keenan Allen. I'm with you there. As far as on the other side of the ball, these Dallas wide receivers, I have a ton of interest in as well. Cooper, 6,800. I like him a lot. CeeDee Lamb, 6,400. I like him a lot. I'm going to be very heavy on both of those two. We have CeeDee Lamb right now coming in at 7% ownership, which is very interesting. And then Amari Cooper coming in at 8% ownership. So yeah, I'm very high on, first of all, the game in general, but both of these, Keenan Allen, I'm high on Cooper, and I'm very high on CeeDee Lamb as well. So also in this range, you take a look at it, is going to be some of these, the Tampa Bay wide receivers. You have Antonio Brown, who is sitting at 6,000. Mike Evans, who is sitting at 6,100. And then you have Chris Godwin sitting at 6,600. I don't know if you feel the same way, but I think all three of those guys are underpriced here. I think they should be priced up a lot more. But, out of those three, Godwin, Evans, and Brown, if you have any interest at all, who's going to be your favorite out of those three?
Well, I'd go with the one that was targeted the most if we're taking price aside, and that was Godwin. He had a horrific fumble in that game that nearly cost them the game. But I don't think that's going to be anything that costs him work going forward, like we've talked about with the Patriots. So, price aside, you're right. All of them are look way too cheap to me in this one as well, and especially against Atlanta, who looked horrible and is a total pass funnel offense. So Godwin, I think he can do in cash and GPP. I think Brown, to a slightly lesser extent, is the same. Evans was disappointing in that one, but you're still talking about a guy who led the team last year in touchdowns and air yards. So I don't think you push the panic button on Evans. And if he comes in at lower ownership as the other ones, he'll be my favorite GPP target of the three. But Godwin, if I'm picking one of them.
Yep, fair. It's probably going to be more of an ownership thing for me. Right now, we have Godwin coming in as the fourth highest owned at 14%. And then we have Mike Evans coming in at 7% owned. And then Antonio Brown coming in at 6% owned. So, yeah, very high on the Tampa Bay wide receivers. I love the matchup, 52-point total. I like it quite a bit. Anything else sticking out to you in this 6K range? I see Allen Robinson going against Cincinnati here, 6,200. I think is another guy that's just underpriced here.
Yeah, very, very underpriced, Allen Robinson. He's such a target hog, and he had as tough a matchup as you can have in week one against Jalen Ramsey, but he's still got 11 targets. It doesn't matter who his quarterback is. So cash GPP, I have no problem playing Allen Robinson at all there. And then the other ones are you're getting the Rams wide receivers at way too cheap price tags because they released the pricing before the Sunday night game. So, if you're looking at Cooper Kupp at $6,000, he played 98% of the snaps. He had 10 targets. They have Stafford quarterbacking them now. We saw what Tyler Lockett did in the slot against the Colts last week. So, Cooper Kupp is a high-end target of mine in all formats. Robert Woods is a little bit more concerning because Van Jefferson and Deshaun Jackson looked good, and they looked like they had chemistry with Stafford, and even their snap shares were starting to approach Woods. So if I'm playing anybody from this, it's Kupp, but I think you can still play the other guys in GPP.
Yeah, I'm with you there. Kupp coming in at 7% ownership, and then Woods coming in very low owned at 4%. I think those Rams receivers are, very underpriced as well. That seems to be the theme of this wide receiver range. A lot of these guys are underpriced, so why not take advantage of this range. So going down, anybody sticking out like in the 5K to 6K range, one thing that I do want to bring up is going to be these Bengals wide receivers. You have T. Higgins, who I really liked last week, did very well, 15.8 DraftKings points. He's 5,400 this week. I think they priced him up a little bit. And then also Jamar Chase, actually sprinkled a little bit of him last week. It worked out pretty good. He had 23.9 DraftKings points. Looks like the preseason concerns weren't really something to look at because he looked good. He looked very good. And he's sitting at 5,000. So right off the bat, I think Jamar Chase and both T. Higgins are way too cheap this week. Do you feel the same? And what else are you looking at in this 5 to 6K range?
Yeah, for sure. I agree with you on that. I think you can even at those prices. We talked about in kind of the cash floor in that 6K range, but I think if you need to go cheaper, even in cash, there's really not an argument against a 5,000 Chase and T. Higgins even cheaper. So I'm fine with those in cash. They're great in GPPs, especially if you're using Burrow, who you mentioned as the quarterback in GPP. Will definitely have Bengals stacks. Another one that sticks out to me is Cole Beasley at 4,600. I think he's a really good cash floor play if you need to save a little bit more there. He had Minkah Fitzpatrick on him the whole game who is an elite cover for Pittsburgh, and he still had 8 catches on 13 targets. I don't know what his ownership is going to do. I don't know if all this off-season stuff with him is keeping people away from him, but $4,600 for his target floor seems too cheap to me in a better slot matchup than he was facing last week.
Yep, good point. Beasley definitely does stick out to me as well. Curious to hear your thoughts on the Pittsburgh wide receivers. A little bit better of a matchup this week than last week. Any thoughts on them? We'll bring up the prices here. So we have Claypool, who is 5,600. We have Juju, who is 5,700. And then we have Deontay Johnson, who is 6,400 last week. Johnson scored 14.6 points. He did lead the Steelers wide receivers there. Juju with 9.2, and then Claypool with 10. Any thoughts on them?
Yeah, I don't think they're going to be in cash for me at all. Just because I'm still trying to kind of I need a little bit longer to shake out how this offense runs now with a running back like Najee Harris, who got a workload and looked like he's going to again. You brought up the fact that all the Pittsburgh guys are pretty cheap. But I think with Najee, the I got to kind of see where he fits in, where the targets go. Deontay Johnson would definitely be my favorite of the bunch. He's in that same 6K range. He was top 5 in targets in the NFL last year, and he had 10 in week 1. So I think he's fine in any format. I'm personally looking at the guys we've already mentioned over him, but he's got a nice floor as well. Still, though, like Roethlisberger, 5.9 average depth of target. You have to be a little bit concerned about that, I think.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, the only thing I'll say is, Harris is projected to be the highest on running back. I think going to these Pittsburgh receivers could be a way to get different in terms of tournaments. Of course, I'm going with Harris and Cash, but taking a look at the ownership for some of these wide receivers on Pittsburgh, Johnson 4%, you have Claypool 3%, as well as Juju 3% as well. I think that's something that I might take a look at throughout the week. Going down in this bottom range, there's a guy that really sticks out to me. I'll touch on him if you don't, but going down in the kind of this punt range, and it's weird. Like last week, we touched on at least like 5 to 6, 7, maybe 7, 8 players down in this 3K to 4K range. This week, it's not that stacked, but there are some guys that stick out. So who's sticking out to you down in this low range here?
No, you're right. And I've been searching and searching for it. And it's just not the case. And that's normal. You get week 1, you get a lot of those because the pricing comes out so often. Or so often, so early in that one. I think Marquez Callaway is fine to look at again. We knew exactly what he was, and we talked about it on the show that he's somebody at his price tag. I think it was 3,400. That he was the highest owned player on the slate, and you had to eat his chalk, but you also knew that he was getting blanketed by top cover corners for Green Bay. He's got a much better matchup against Carolina this week. So, I'm a little bit leery in cash. Again, just because he's still not a proven playmaker, even if he did have big preseason games. But if we're assuming he's the wide receiver one in New Orleans, he's 4,200. So at the very least, play him in GPPs.
Yep, I was definitely considering him as well. Going down to the bottom of the barrel, I think Cedric Wilson really sticks out to me. He's going to be 3,100. I really want a piece of this game. Not even a piece. I want a lot of this game. 55-point game total. I think the Dallas Cowboys are going to throw it a ton. They are projected to be underdogs as well, which I do like. And Cedric Wilson is definitely somebody I can see myself stacking, double stacking with Dak. I mean, get Cedric Wilson in there, get Cooper in there, get Cedric Wilson in there, get Lamb in there. And, Michael Gallup is going to be out for, I forget how long it is, but a couple weeks at least. So I think Cedric Wilson at 3,100 is definitely somewhere to look, especially considering how much Dallas does throw the ball. Another guy I wanted to throw out, curious to get your thoughts on KJ Osborne for Minnesota. He is 3,300. He had 9 targets last week against Cincinnati, 7 receptions. He had 76 yards as well. Any thoughts on Osborne?
I was just going to ask you about him. I don't. If I'm in that range, if I'm using that range as a punt for cash, it's definitely Wilson. You hit on everything there. He's cheap exposure to the best game, like free exposure to the best game. So if you want a punt wide receiver and that 3K range, he's the guy. I mean, Osborne played no offensive snaps last year and very little special teams snaps. But you pointed out he got 9 targets and he made the most of them. I just think his involvement can't be counted on as long as Jefferson and Thielen and Cook are all healthy and playing the snaps that they are. 3,300, there's not much risk to doing that, but so go ahead in GPP, especially they're playing Arizona, who likes to push the pace. So there should be more passes to be thrown from Minnesota, or more plays run at least. So at 3,300, I'm fine with it, but he's not someone that I was like scrambling to bid on in waivers, and I know he's there. And if I need a differentiation in that 3K range from Wilson, I'll take him, but I'm not excited about him. What about you there?
Same thing. I mean, I'll probably sprinkle a little bit of him. I'm not going to go like all in, but I do think he's very interesting. I like the game against Arizona there. I think it's like a 52-point game total there. So, yeah, somebody I'm kind of probably sprinkling if I need to go down there and get somebody. To be honest, I'm more interested in Wilson at 3,100, though. We don't have the ownerships for either of those two yet. So Sunday we'll be talking about their ownership. I'm really curious to hear, their ownership on Sunday there, Wilson and Osborne as well. So I think that's about it for me, at least for wide receivers. Anything else you wanted to talk about? Anything else that stuck out at wide receiver?
Well, in that same range, I'm just curious to get your thoughts on another one. Odell Beckham's not playing again. They've already ruled him out. And Donovan Peoples-Jones didn't do anything in the game against the Chiefs, which was surprising because he played 80% of the snaps and there was just scoring galore in that game. He's the minimum 3,000. Are you interested in him at all? He did play 80% of the snaps.
Who'd you say, my bad?
Donovan Peoples-Jones.
No, not really, to be honest. If anything, I take a look at Schwartz. I thought Schwartz played pretty well, 5 targets, 3 receptions. And it's funny, in my season-long league, somebody literally bid, I think it was like $45 on Anthony Schwartz. And everybody was like, what are you doing? So that was hilarious. But yeah, Peoples-Jones, I'd probably be more interested in Schwartz. I thought he looked very good in that game.
Yeah, that's a weird one too. So I mean, I think we touched on the Browns that you should be playing in that game anyway.
Yeah, I think all my ownership is going to be going to Chubb for sure.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, so let's move on to tight ends. Last week, I talked about it all week, right? Like, I'm going to be very high on Travis Kelce, and then I ended up with the majority of my lineups having Kyle Pitts and he did not do great along with the Falcons. He scored 7.1 DraftKings points. What I will say, though, is he was targeted 8 times, only 4 receptions. I think this could be an interesting week to go right back to him. So for me, I'm kind of looking at Kyle Pitts up top. Of course, you have Darren Waller, who had a massive 19 targets. I could not believe it. Darren Waller is definitely somebody that's going to gain a lot of ownership. And then Kittle, I think, is a little bit too cheap as well at 6,400. So between Waller, Kittle, Pitts, I guess you could throw Gronk in there for some reason. Which one of those four do you like the most?
If I'm paying up in that range past the lower end, then I'm probably going all the way up. I mean, 19 targets speaks for itself there. And this was with, in a game where they were throwing all over the place, and he had his full complement of wide receivers for a while. He just looks Waller's way all the time. That kind of floor in DFS is something that shouldn't be overlooked. So Pittsburgh was 21st in DVOA against the tight end position last year. So and they're hurting on defense as well. So I don't think it's going to work out for me to pay that much for a tight end this week in cash, but I will have tons and tons of Waller and GPP, especially if we're looking at those Pittsburgh stacks that we talked about just now in GPPs with the receivers. And you got to bring it back with a Raider. He's the only Raider that I'm going to bring it back with.
Yeah, makes sense. How can you not play Waller? 19 targets is just insane. They really do focus on getting him the ball, to say the least. He is projected to be the highest owned tight end. No surprise there. Following him is going to be Kittle and then Pitts. So the three we touched on there are going to be the three highest owned. For me, though, I'm kind of looking down in this range, and there's two guys that really do stick out to me. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on these two guys. One being Noah Fant. So of course, Jerry Jeudy is going to be out for a few weeks. Fant is going to get more target share. I do believe he scored 12.2 DraftKings points last week. You have a solid, fairly solid matchup against the Jaguars here, who I thought Houston was going to be the worst team this year. No, it's going to be the Jaguars, who's probably going to be the worst team this year. And, Fant, like I said, 8 targets, 6 receptions, 12.2 points. I think Fant is somebody that I'm 100% considering at this price tag. The other guy is going to be Tyler Higbee, who is 4,100, had 6 targets, 5 receptions last week, 68 yards. We mentioned the Rams and how well they looked last week. So between those two guys, Fant and Higbee, if you had to pick between the one, which one would you go with?
Yeah. You've hit my two targets there at tight end. It's like I said, I'm probably not going to get up to Waller in cash just because I want so many of those 6,000 to 7,000 wide receivers in there, and there's just going to not be enough room for a Waller in that. Fant and Higbee, it's totally between the two of them right now for me. I'm leaning Fant right now because it looks like he has less of a battle for targets with Jerry Jeudy injured. The Rams have all those wide receivers that they could spread it out to a little bit more in Indianapolis's cover defense. But that said, I mean, Higbee at 4,100, I love him there. My lean is definitely to Fant right now, but I'll do more digging. And then the other one in that same range, again, is a cheap piece of that Chargers Dallas game that we've been talking about. Jared Cook is 3,900, and he was featured in the opening game. They were looking at him all over the place. Dallas allowed the 4th most points per tight end last year, or fantasy points per game to tight ends last year. He had 8 targets from Herbert. So he's another one, I think, in that range that you could definitely justify using in any format.
Yeah, it looks like we're 100% on the same page for tight end this week. We touched on, we have the same thoughts here. Fant, I'm leaning to him as well. And then Jared Cook, it's a great way to get exposure to that 55-point game total. Jared Cook being very cheap, 3,900, had 8 targets himself last week against a Dallas defense that is not that great at all. So yeah, Jared Cook is somebody else that I'm definitely considering in my stacks with Herbert. As far as that, I think we pretty much covered everybody that I'm going to be looking at this week, and mostly Fant and Cook for me. Down below, if I go up, yeah, Waller is great. Kittle, Pitts are fine as well. Anybody else sticking out to you at all?
Not really. Komet, I guess, at 3,700 is one to keep an eye on. I mean, he saw 17.5% of the target share in week 1, which was 7 targets, played 75% of the snaps. We've known he was kind of kicking Jimmy Graham out of there for a while. Cincinnati is a great matchup for opposing tight ends. So I think I don't see justifying playing him against over the three that we talked about in Cash, who I think have a better floor ceiling combination. But for a little bit less, I don't mind Komet and GPP.
Yep. Komet's fine for sure. But like you said, I do like the other three we talked about more.
Mhm.
We'll quickly touch on defense. We don't have to go into it too much, but in terms of defense, so my strategy last week was to pay down. I had a lot of Bengals defense that worked out really well. I also had a lot of Falcons. Both were minimum 2K. The Falcons did horrible. The Bengals did really well. In terms of your defensive strategy, I know it's Wednesday, it's early. Are you looking at paying up a defense? Or are you looking at paying down?
Probably down. I had the Falcons for a while until I freed up some money with that silly McCaffrey to Mostert switch, and that allowed me to play the Bills at 2,500, who weren't that good either. I like the Jets at 2,200 at home against a rookie quarterback in a low total. I don't think they need to do much to pay off that price tag. It looks like, unless I'm reading this wrong, they're coming in at the highest owned as of right now. So in Cash, I'm fine just eating that. If you want to pay up at all, I think it's the other side of that game. The Patriots could do a lot of damage against another rookie quarterback who looked bad for more than he looked good in the opening game against Carolina.
Yeah, it's rough down. I'm typically somebody that likes to pay down at defense, but it is very rough. I'm with you as
Yeah.
well. I think the Jets defense is fine. Going up a little bit. If I was to pay up for a defense, I guess the one that does stick out to me, and they're not like crazy priced. They're not up there at 4.5K like the Rams, 4,000 like the Buccaneers, but the Cleveland Browns defense definitely does draw my
Hmm.
interest going against the
Hmm.
Texans. Great game. I think they're 12 and a half point favorites. They're at home. I think it's pretty solid matchup there. I think the Browns, if I was to pay up, I think that's the one I would look at. But yeah, I'm typically, like I said, I'm typically looking to pay down, and it's really rough to say the least.
Yeah, and that's a good point. That's even for GPPs too. If they have some low ownership, the Browns should have plenty of opportunities. If Houston's playing from as behind as it looks like they should be, that invites plenty of opportunities for sacks and turnovers. So I like that pick. And then the Saints too, 3,100. They're not a bad pick at home against Carolina with their pass rush.
Yep, for sure. Yeah, Pittsburgh Steelers are up there in ownership. The Saints are up there in ownership. The Bears, the Jets as well, Patriots. So, yeah, we'll definitely talk about defense more on Sunday. And yeah, that's about it. Any other final thoughts on the slate as a whole, or anything else you'd like to mention?
No, I think we'll just be watching the ownership trends as they go because we've touched on a lot of times in this that could be key for a lot of the decisions of similarly ranked players. So we'll really keep an eye on that and just kind of see where it goes as the week goes along and as lines move and stuff.
Yeah, for sure. Can't wait to touch on ownership with you on Sunday. We'll be going live on at 10 o'clock Eastern time. And yeah, looking forward to it. Looking forward to seeing how ownership does shake out. Sunday, we'll be going by game. We'll touch on more stacks. We'll touch on strategy as well. And yeah, definitely looking forward to that. So that's about it, guys. See you later, and good luck for week 2 of the NFL.